So I spoke with the government minister. We had a meeting with one of the government ministers here in Fremantle. We spoke a little bit about Gaza and what the government's position was and things like that. And great on him for taking the time to talk to us and listening to us. And I think he was really empathetic. But I think his hands were just tied. I mean, I think the script is there of what you're allowed to do and what you're allowed to
Mm.
do, and I just felt like the script was there and he couldn't really deviate from the script.
I'm hearing from one of the board members who
Mm,
regularly goes to Parliament House to lobby parliamentarians that at every turn, whenever she introduced the discussion with them, they always raise this theme, oh, but, we have to be so wary, that's anti-Semitic, or this is anti-Semitic, or
mhm,
that's anti-Semitic. And she just felt like she was completely banging her head against the
mhm.
proverbial brick wall
Yeah,
in terms of just this complete lack of recognition
yeah,
that there can be anything, any criticism of
yeah,
Israel
yeah.
whatsoever at any level.
Well, I think, when you talk about something like this, obviously it can be quite charged if you're somebody that's Jewish, who's experienced anti-Semitism, to have a conversation like this and to somebody say, to dismiss their experience of anti-Semitism per se. And I think, like what your mother went through when she was stripped at university of her degree, stripped of her citizenship. The only crime that she committed was being Jewish. Moved around, family members killed in the Holocaust. Jewish people weren't allowed to work certain jobs.
Mm.
That's why they're very prevalent in Hollywood because they were allowed to be in the theaters and the arts, but they weren't allowed to, do other jobs.
Mm.
And that must be a very difficult experience to deal with that level of racism
Mm.
and that level of anti-Semitism. That must be quite difficult. So I understand where people come and they're quite charged with it, but that's very serious, right? Your mother being stripped of her citizenship for being Jewish.
Mm.
That's very real. That's very serious. What's happening now, though, is we're justifying the suffering of people like your mother, and we're using that suffering to justify the suffering of other people. And I actually think that's probably one of the worst things to happen to Jewish people because it takes away from the seriousness of what went on a long time ago and what goes on still to this day. But it strips away the seriousness of it because when you start saying, hey, listen, you can't kill women and children, you can't starve a population.
Mm.
When you start saying you can't do that, and people say you're anti-Semitic,
Mm.
right, for saying that, or for saying free Palestine, that's anti-Semitic,
Mm.
or from the river to the sea, that's anti-Semitic, right? If all of these things become anti-Semitic, you're taking away from what was real anti-Semitism back in the day, right?